Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Rabbi.
We're learning Mishna Sukkah, Parak Aleph, Chapter 1, Mishna Beis, Mishna 2. Ha'isa Sukkasai Tachas Ha'ilan. If one builds his sukkah under a tree, Kilo Asa B'Sai Chabayis, it's as if he built the sukkah within the house. Okay? So that means it's derived from a verse in the Torah that a sukkah may not be covered. Meaning, you have your sukkah, you have your walls, you have your schach, and now there's something covering above. Here the Mishnah speaks of a sukkah that is covered with something that is unfit to be used as schach. The branches of a tree are unfit for schach because they are attached to the ground, and the roof of a house is unfit for what we'll see in the exact reason we'll see later. So here you have your sukkah. You built a sukkah, but you built it under something that's covering the sukkah. And that something couldn't be used for schach. Let's say you just went ahead and you built walls and you put it under a tree and you want the tree to be your schach. You can't do that. Schach cannot be attached to the ground. So a tree cannot be kosher schach. In our case, if you go ahead and you build your house inside a house, so there's a roof on top of your schach, that's not good. That's not kosher. Because the roof of a house can't be used for schach on a sukkah. Can't be the covering for a sukkah. So when your schach is covered by something that couldn't be used as schach, that invalidates your sukkah. So that's what this means here. One who builds his sukkah under a tree, as if he built it inside the house. Next case. Sukkah al gabe sukkah. A sukkah on top of a sukkah. All right. This person built a sukkah, made his walls, made the schach, he put up the branches, whatever he used for schach. And that schach, which is, call it the ceiling of the sukkah below, acts as the floor for the sukkah above. And then you have another sukkah with schach. So the Mishnah says like this. Sukkah al gabi sukkah, a sukkah on top of a sukkah, Ha'elyoina kashera, the top one is kosher, but tachtona psula, and the bottom one is not kosher. Top one kosher, bottom one not. This is the first opinion of the Mishnah. What's the explanation? The answer is because according to this Tana, there is a halacha, the same way you cannot build your sukkah under a tree, right? You cannot have your sukkah under another sukkah. That's what we derive from the Torah. You can't have a sukkah under a sukkah. So if you're on top, that's your sukkah. There's no sukkah above that. But if you're at the bottom, there's a sukkah above. And the point, and we derive, again, we have a derivation to learn that even though, again, in this case, the schach on top is kosher. But if it's part of a sukkah, if it's part of a kosher sukkah, then it has a new invalidation of a sukkah, of being a sukkah under another sukkah. Now, they point out here, very interesting with Tiferes Yisrael. However, this law applies only where the upper sukkah is truly a sukkah. If it has proper schach, but is invalid for some other reason, for example, it is less than 10 tefachim high. Remember, we had that yesterday. A sukkah that's less than 10 tefachim high isn't the kosher sukkah. So if, let's say, my sukkah on top of my sukkah is less than 10 tefachim high, the schach is kosher, right? It's made out of material that's kosher for schach, but the sukkah isn't kosher. It's not a sukkah. So then I don't have a sukkah under a sukkah. I have my sukkah with its kosher schach under kosher schach, under more schach, but it's not a sukkah, right? Sukkah, schach that's just hanging isn't a sukkah. So therefore, if the sukkah on top isn't a valid sukkah, there's no invalidation. The invalidation is a sukkah under a sukkah. But a sukkah under more schach, under more kosher schach, is not a validation. And therefore, the Mishnah is specifically talking about the sukkah gabi sukkah, where the sukkah above is a kosher sukkah. And even though it's a kosher sukkah with kosher schach, it invalidates it just like it would be under non-kosher schach. Now, that's the first opinion. Rabbi Yehuda says, excuse me, and main dirim bel yoina, literally translated means if there are no people living above, hatachtoina kashera, the bottom one is kosher. Now, what that means is, according to Rabbi Yehuda, if the top one is fit for people to live in, then you have a problem of a sukkah on top of a sukkah. If the top one is not livable, if it's not livable, it may halachically be kosher, but it's not livable, then it doesn't invalidate the bottom one. It's not considered sukkah on top of a sukkah. Now, let's go through this a little bit. So if the floor of the upper sukkah, which is the schach of the lower one, right? That's the case, right? You're talking about the floor of the upper sukkah, that's the schach of the lower one, is not strong enough to support blankets and pillows. That's the wording that's used in the Gemara. The upper level cannot be called a sukkah because it is unfit to be lived in. Now, if you're wondering, like pillows and blankets, how about the person? So they explain here, even if it can support a person, it's considered unfit if it cannot support his bedding as well. Meaning he goes up there, it's so strong enough to hold. But if he starts bringing his pillows and his blankets, not going to be able to hold. So if it's not livable, since the upper level is not a sukkah because it's not livable, the disqualification of a sukkah under a sukkah does not apply and the lower sukkah is valid. So that's Rabbi Yehuda. If you've got a situation where the upper one is not livable, why is it not livable? Because you can't have a person up there with his bedding, then it's not a sukkah. And that's not a problem of a sukkah under a sukkah. Okay, now, they add more. This, the Bartanur brings this down. This is very interesting. The Tanakama agrees that if the upper floor cannot support pillows and blankets at all, if he's up there and now he puts in his blanket and his pillow, the whole thing comes crashing down, okay? Even the Tanakama agrees it's an invalid sukkah, which does not disqualify the lower one. I mean, according to the Tanakama, everybody agrees. The point that we're bringing out here right now is that although Rabbi Yehuda is the only one who mentioned livable, everybody holds to be considered a sukkah, it's got to be livable. So if you can't be up there with your pillow and your blanket, it's not a kosher sukkah. Okay. So the Tanakh agrees that if the upper floor cannot support pillows and blankets at all, it is an invalid sukkah, which does not disqualify the lower one. Okay. So, and if it could hold, then everybody agrees it is a sukkah, right? If it can hold you when you're bedding, that's where Yehuda says, that's where we say it is a sukkah under a sukkah. So where are they arguing? The dispute is limited to where the upper floor can support pillows and blankets, but only barely. For example, it sways under their weight. So you're there on you're straight out there on the floor, and the floor is like going, it's like sagging up and down. But okay, so it's not great, but it's working. Okay. So that is where the machlokes revolves around. According to the Tanakama, such a sukkah is valid. So it disqualifies the lower sukkah. According to Yehuda, it is not valid and thus does not affect the lower one. So what we have here is, so putting everything together, in summary, we have a halacha, a sukkah under a sukkah is invalid. The thing is that we know that if the upper sukkah, what we're calling a sukkah, is really not a kosher sukkah, it may have kosher, it has to have kosher schach, right? But for another reason, it's not a good sukkah, then it's not a sukkah under a sukkah. The Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda argue in the following. We had examples where halachically wasn't a kosher sukkah, right? Like it was lower than 10 tefachim high. But here we have machlekes Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda about where the sukkah is not livable. A sukkah that's not livable is not a sukkah. It's not considered a sukkah. And therefore, so what does it mean it's not livable? So if it's not livable to the point that you and your blanket and pillows can't go in there, it couldn't hold you up, couldn't hold everything up, that's not called livable, it's not a sukkah. It doesn't invalidate the lower sukkah. If it could hold you and your blankets, no problem, holding you and your blankets and pillow up there, it is a sukkah on top of a sukkah. And everybody agree the bottom one's not kosher. Only the top one would be kosher. But the argument between the Tanakh and Rabbi Yehuda is where it can hold you and your pillows and blankets, barely. Where it's kind of, where it's holding out, but it's kind of, it's kind of iffy, okay? Or it looks iffy. I mean, it's barely doing it, but it does it, okay? that is where we say the Tanakama holds is livable. It's a sukkah. And therefore, it invalidates the bottom one. According to Rabbi Yehuda, that's not called livable. And therefore, it is not a sukkah on top of a sukkah. And therefore, the bottom one is kosher. And the halacha follows the Tanakama. That even if it's barely livable, in the case with the pillows and the blankets and the person, that's called a kosher sukkah. And that would invalidate the bottom sukkah. Have a wonderful day and a wonderful Shabbos.
Thank you. Bye.
You're welcome.
Okay, I live in the